The rain started early that morning, soft at first, a gentle tapping against the window. Then it grew steady, a quiet rhythm that filled the space around Emily's house. She stood by the window, watching droplets gather and race down the glass, blurring the world outside like a watercolor painting. She'd just woken up, wrapped in the warmth of a thick blanket. And already the heaviness settled on her chest, the kind that came from too many sleepless nights and too many things left unsaid. As she reached for the blinds, the doorbell rang. Emily frowned. Who could it be in this weather? She slipped on slippers and opened the door. There, sitting on the porch beneath the awning, was a steaming thermos and a small paper cup. Beside it lay a note weighted down by a smooth stone. She picked up the cup and felt the warmth seep into her palms. The rich aroma of coffee rose instantly, comforting and familiar. Her eyes fell on the note. Written in Jake's neat handwriting, it said simply, "Thought you might need this today." Her heart fluttered. She hadn't expected this. The gesture was small, yet it felt like a lifeline. She took a sip, savoring the bitter warmth. For a moment she considered going next door and thanking him in person. But the rain was steady and cold, and instead she closed the door softly and carried the coffee inside. The rest of the day passed slowly. Emily found herself staring out the window often, the image of that thermos on the porch etched clearly. In her mind, it wasn't just the coffee, 'twas the thought behind it. The kindness. 2 days later, the rain had stopped, leaving the earth smelling fresh and damp. Emily was outside pruning her overgrown lilac bush when she heard the gate creak behind her. She turned to see Jake, dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans, his hair still a little wet from the morning drizzle. "Hey," he said quietly. Emily straightened, surprised to see him. "Jake." "Hi." He shifted, glancing at the bushes she'd been trimming. "You okay?" She paused. The question was simple, but she wasn't sure how to answer. "I don't know," she admitted, lowering her clippers. "I feel lonely." "The time." Jake nodded slowly, stepping closer but respecting the unspoken boundary between them. "I get that," he said softly. "More than you probably realize." They stood there in the soft light, the smell of wet earth and lilac surrounding them. The moment felt delicate as if one wrong word could shatter something fragile. Emily swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "I didn't expect this," she whispered. "Not from you." Jake looked at her, eyes searching. "Neither did I." Their conversation hung in the air like an unfinished song. That evening, Emily sat alone on her back porch, wrapped in a thick sweater. The sky was fading into dusk, and the world around her felt empty and still. Her phone buzzed. A message. From Jake. "Do you want to talk? I'm on the back porch." She stared at the screen, heart pounding. Should she go out? Would it be a mistake? What if someone saw? Her fingers trembled as she typed, "Okay." She stood and slipped outside quietly. There he was, sitting in a wooden chair, a soft glow from the porch light casting shadows across his face. He looked up and smiled gently when he saw her. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They sat side by side, close but not touching, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, the faint rustle of leaves. For a long time, neither spoke. Just the quiet between them, filled with something heavy and unspoken. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "I haven't felt like myself in a long time." Jake nodded, his eyes softening. "Me neither." Their eyes met. It was a look that carried years of longing, heartbreak, and hope all tangled up in one moment. He reached out, pressing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her breath caught without thinking. Without planning, Jake leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle, tender, like a secret shared in the dark. Emily's heart thundered in her chest. Her lips trembled. She pulled back suddenly, eyes wide. "I can't," she whispered. "This isn't right." Jake stood, conflicted. "I'm sorry, it won't happen again." He turned and walked away, leaving muddy footprints on the porch boards. Emily closed the door behind him, trembling. She wasn't shaking because of what happened. She was shaking because of what almost did. Reflection. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, memories of Jake's touch and his eyes flickering through her mind. Like a movie she didn't know if she wanted to watch again. She knew the rules. She knew this was complicated, dangerous. Even Jake was Claire's husband. Claire was kind and good. Emily had no wish to hurt anyone, but the loneliness inside her had found a companion. And the warmth of that kiss had whispered promises of something she had forgotten: connection. She wasn't sure where this was going. She wasn't sure if there was a future, but she knew one thing for certain: her life was no longer the same. The next morning, the sun was pale, barely breaking through a sky still heavy with clouds from the night before. Emily woke to a quiet house, the faint smell of rain lingering in the air. Her mind was restless. Thoughts from the night before played like a broken record: Jake's kiss, the sudden electricity, then the retreat, the apology, and the lingering tension between what had happened and what should never have. She rose slowly, pulling on a soft sweater, her feet bare on the cool wooden floor as she made her way to the kitchen. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. The house felt too big, too empty, and yet somehow too full of unspoken things. She made coffee, the routine grounding her in reality. And then she went to the window, looking out at the fence they'd fixed together. It was perfect now, standing tall and steady, a barrier, yes, but also a symbol of boundaries, but also of what could be rebuilt. As she sipped her coffee, her phone buzzed. A message from Jake. "Can we talk?" Her heart pounded. The weight of those two words felt like a question she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. She typed back slowly, fingers trembling, "Yes." An hour later, Jake was at her door. His expression was serious, but kind. He looked worn, like the past few days had taken more from him than he wanted to admit. They sat down again on the back porch. This time there was no hesitation, no awkwardness. Just two people holding fragile pieces of themselves in the open air. "I'm sorry for last night," Jake began. "I didn't mean to confuse you or to make things harder." Emily looked at him, searching for answers in his eyes. "It wasn't just last night. I've felt this. Something for a while now." He nodded, swallowing. "Me too. But we're stuck, aren't we? Claire, the kids. I love my family." "I know," she whispered. "I don't want to hurt anyone." Jake reached out and took her hand, warm and warm. "Steady." "Neither do I." They sat in silence, fingers intertwined, the weight of the moment settling around them. Then Jake surprised her. "But if I'm honest, I don't know if I can keep pretending I'm okay with just being neighbors." Emily's breath hitched. They looked at each other, the distance between them shrinking. "Maybe," she said softly, "maybe this fence isn't just a barrier. Maybe it's a crossing point." The kiss that changed everything without thinking. Jake leaned in again, this time with more certainty, his lips brushing hers like a promise. Emily closed her eyes, surrendering to the warmth and longing she'd tried so hard to deny. The world around them faded. The past, the rules, the neighbors' expectations, all gone. But then, just as suddenly, they pulled apart, breathless. Emily rested her forehead against his, voice barely audible. "What are we doing?" Jake shook his head. "I don't know." Aftermath. And heartbreak days passed like a slow tide, pulling them closer and pushing them apart. Every stolen glance, every accidental touch, was charged with a mixture of desire and guilt. Claire was due back soon. The thought of what might happen when she returned haunted them both. Emily spent restless nights wondering if she was a fool or a woman waking from a long sleep. Jake tried to be the good husband and perfect father, but Emily could see the cracks in his armor. One afternoon, as they sat repairing a broken step on her porch, Emily's hand brushed Jake's. They shared a look, words hanging unspoken. "I don't want this to end in heartbreak," she said quietly. "Neither do I," he replied. The decision it became clear they had a choice to make. Walk away or face the consequences. Emily knew she had to protect her own heart. But she couldn't pretend she wasn't already tangled up in his. And Jake knew he had to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. As the sun set behind the trees, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, Emily and Jake sat together, caught between hope and reality. Their hands touched once more, a silent vow to face whatever came next, even if it meant shaking to their core. The wind had been howling all night, slipping through cracks in the old windows, rattling branches against the siding like bony fingers tapping to be let in. Emily Dawson hadn't slept much. She rarely did these days since the divorce nights. Felt like echoes, too quiet, too long. The house that once felt alive with laughter and routine had turned into a hollow place. The silence was loud and the shadows felt unfamiliar, like guests overstaying their welcome. She wrapped her robe tighter around herself as she shuffled into the kitchen. The floor was cold under her bare feet. Michigan was already flirting with the first signs of fall, crisp mornings, yellow leaves gathering on the lawn, and that slow, aching beauty that made everything feel more fragile as the coffee machine gurgled to life. Emily leaned against the counter and glanced out the window. Her heart sank. The fence, the one that ran along the back of the property separating her yard from the Harrisons. It had been leaning for months, ever since the spring rains, but now it was down. Several panels lay flat on the grass like wounded soldiers, splinters pointing at the sky. Of course, she thought. Of course this would happen now. The fence had been a project she and Rob, her ex-husband, had always planned to fix together. But plans turned into arguments, and arguments turned into silence. Then, one day, he packed a single suitcase, said it wasn't working anymore, and left. That was 8 months ago. Since then, everything had become a list of things she couldn't quite bring herself to do. Fixing the fence had fallen somewhere between cleaning out the garage and figuring out who she was now. She sighed, pressing the warm coffee mug to her lips. Then she saw him. Jake Harrison. He was walking across the lawn, barefoot, in flannel pajama pants and a long-sleeve Henley shirt pushed up to his elbows. His hair was messy, like he'd just rolled out of bed, and he moved with a kind of easy confidence that made her suddenly very aware of the state she was in brushed hair. No makeup, robe slightly askew. Jake was Claire's husband. Claire. Harrison, her picture-perfect neighbor. It's the woman who somehow managed to keep 3 kids, a spotless home, and a herb garden alive. The woman who waved every morning, whose car smelled like cinnamon and lavender. Emily had spoken to Claire more times than 2. Jake. He was polite but distant, the kind of man who nodded hello but rarely made small talk. He worked long hours in construction. Molly remembered Claire mentioning that once during a neighborhood BBQ. Now, here he was, walking toward her fallen fence, eyes scanning the damage. When he noticed her watching from the window, he smiled. "Hey there," he called out. Emily opened the back door, the creaky screen swinging wide. "Hi," she said, voice half lost in the breeze. Jake looked at the broken panels and then back at her. "Looks like that storm finally got the better of it." "Yeah," she said, feeling the edges of embarrassment creep in. "It's been leaning for a while. Just haven't gotten around to it." Jake took a few steps closer, hands on his hips, surveying the fence like a man who saw solutions, not problems. "I could help, if you like." Emily blinked. "Help?" He smiled again, a little softer this time. "I've got the tools. It wouldn't take long. Might be nice to get out of the house for a bit." Her first instinct was to say no. She didn't want charity, and definitely not from the man married to the woman who seemed to have it all together. But something about the way he said, "It's casual, no pressure, no judgment," made her pause. She bit her lip. "You sure? I don't want to be a bother." Jake shrugged. "You're not. I've got time this morning. I'll grab my toolbox and a couple coffees. Be back in 20. Before she could protest, he turned and walked back across the lawn. Leaving footprints in the dew-covered grass, Emily stood there for a moment, the wind tugging at the hem of her robe. Something about that moment, it felt small. But it wasn't. It felt like the first time in a long time that someone saw her. Not the woman left behind, not the one still putting herself back together, but just her. She closed the door and leaned against it, her heart beating faster than it should have. Maybe it was the surprise. Or maybe it was the way his voice had. Sounded kind, sure, steady. She looked out the window again and saw him disappear into his garage. Her fingers tightened around the coffee mug. She didn't know what helping with a fence would lead to. She didn't know that this morning, ordinary in every way, would become the moment she remembered forever, and she had no idea. Chase how much her life was about to change. By the time Jake returned with his toolbox, the sun had fully risen, and the morning chill was starting to lift. Emily had changed into jeans and a soft cream sweater, something casual but not too casual. She'd even run a brush through her hair, though she wasn't ready to ask herself why she cared. He crossed the lawn carrying a red thermos in one hand and a box of tools in the other. When he reached her, he held out the thermos. Black coffee. "No sugar," he said with a smile. "I guessed." She took it slowly, her fingers brushing his for just a second. The warmth of the coffee seeped into her hands. But it was his touch that made her heart flicker. "You guessed right," she replied, smiling despite herself. They began with the fallen panels, working side by side on the grass. Jake showed her how to hold the board steady while he drilled in new screws. He worked quietly, but not in an awkward way. His presence felt calm, grounded. It had been a long time since Emily had felt safe around a man. "Where'd you learn to do all this?" she asked as he adjusted a plank. Jake glanced over his shoulder. "My dad owned a small construction company back in Ohio. I started swinging a hammer before I could drive." Emily nodded, watching him work. There was something about the way he moved, focused, unhurried, that she found oddly soothing. Most men she'd known had tried to fix things too quickly in every sense. Jake took his time. "Rob always said he'd fix this," she said quietly, almost to herself. Jake looked up, not pressing, but listening. He kept saying we'd get to it in the spring. Then summer came. Then everything fell apart. Her voice trailed off. Jake didn't say anything at first. Just tightened a bolt, then looked at her gently. "Some things break even when you take care of them." That stopped her. He wasn't talking about fences, and neither was she. They moved on to the next section. And this time, the work went faster. Emily handed him tools, holding panels in place while he measured and drilled. Occasionally, their hands touched, and every time it did, she felt it linger a little longer than it should have. They laughed more than she expected. Jake had a dry sense of humor, and Emily found herself enjoying the banter, the way he made her feel seen without feeling exposed. Like she could just be without trying too hard. At one point, as she reached over to hand him a nail, their eyes locked. It was only for a second. But in that second, something shifted. Neither of them spoke. Not about it anyway. As the day wore on, the fence began to stand again, one panel at a time. Stronger now, steadier, like her. When they finished, Jake stepped back and admired their work. "Not bad for a couple of amateurs," he said with a grin. Emily laughed. "Speak for yourself. I was just the assistant." He looked at her then. Really looked at her. "You were more than that." There it was, again, that something behind his words. That gentle weight of a truth neither of them wanted to fully admit. She cleared her throat, trying to lighten the mood. "Oh, thank you. Really, I couldn't have done this without you." He shrugged, brushing dirt off his hands. "Any time." She hesitated. "Claire still out of town?" Jake nodded. "Yeah. Took the kids to Toronto to visit her sister. Be back Sunday." Emily knew she should stop there. She should smile politely and go back inside. But something in her wouldn't let her. It must be nice. Having a break. Jake looked down at his hands. It's quieter, that's for sure. There was a pause, long enough to feel like something else was trying to rise between them. Jake cleared his throat, breaking the silence. Well, I should get this packed up. Emily nodded. Of course. He gathered his tools slowly, as if neither of them really wanted the moment to end. As he walked back across the lawn, he turned once more and waved. Emily waved back, heart. Quietly racing, she watched him disappear into his garage before going back inside. She poured the last of the coffee from the thermos into her cup and sat by the kitchen window, staring out at the newly fixed fence. But her thoughts weren't on the wood, they were on him, his hands, his voice. The way he looked at her, not like a neighbor, not like someone else's wife, like a woman, like someone who still had something left to give. Reflection that night. Emily lay in bed, her body still sore from kneeling in the grass, her heart even more so. She turned the events of the day over in her mind again and again. Jake's smile, his silence. The way his presence filled the empty corners of her world without forcing its way in. She wasn't a fool. She knew the line they were dancing around. She knew it was dangerous, complicated, and deeply unfair to the woman who had always waved kindly from next door. But she also knew that something in her had woken up. A part of her she thought was long gone. A part that wanted to be seen, touched, chosen. She didn't know what would happen next. She only knew that for the first time in a long time, she felt something again, and sometimes that's where everything begins.